William Afton's Springlock failure is one of, if not the most iconic moment in the lore of Five Nights at Freddy's, but while FNAF 3's minigames leading up to this event seem pretty cut and dry, there's actually a huge lore mystery behind them in terms of when in the FNAF timeline they happen. It's time to forget everything you thought you knew about William Afton, FNAF 3, and Springtrap, because today we're here to solve this tricky part of the Five Nights at Freddy's timeline using facts, logic, and a little bit of backwards thinking. And the answer to this mystery is pretty surprising. Stay tuned as I figure out the mystery of William Afton's Springlocking just in time for FNAF 3's 10-year anniversary.
Looking at each other in the eyes. Excuse me for a second, I'm gonna...
What was supposed to be a simple and quick theory very quickly evolved into something insane that I never saw coming. So I highly suggest you watch till the end to find out the truth about the mysterious timeline placement of FNAF 3's FollowMe Minigames. Today I'm here to discover when William Afton's Springlock failure happened and how it fixes the rest of the FNAF timeline, because you're probably wrong about when this hugely important moment takes place. It's finally time to fix one of the most broken parts of the FNAF lore, because I think I figured it out. I'm WitheredCircle, and today I'll be springing a trap that should never have been sprung. To begin with, what am I even talking about here, and how do FNAF 3's minigames lead up to the death of William Afton? After each of the initial 5 nights of FNAF 3, you'll get a simple minigame depicting one of the 4 main Freddy Fazbear animatronics, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, chasing after a shadowy Freddy for a damaged and abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location, with the shadow telling the Fazbear mascots to follow him. Eventually, the animatronics will reach a room that leads up to another area above it, but when you try to enter said room, the purple guy will jump out and disassemble you. And that's it. At least for the first 4 nights. On night 5, you don't play as an animatronic. Instead, you're an isolated sprite of a ghostly crying child making your way through the building. When you walk up to the room you previously couldn't access, you'll see 4 other ghosts barring the exit from it, and the purple guy will start running frantically as soon as you enter the room. Eventually, he runs towards an empty yellow bunny suit in the corner, and as he walks into it, he starts to laugh. However, after just a few seconds, an explosion of blood escapes his body as he crumples up on the floor and begins to bleed out. As he pants and gasps for breath, the 5 souls begin to fade away, and the minigame ends. I'm going to assume all of you know who this purple guy is and who the 5 ghostly children we see here are. But in case this is somehow your introduction to the lore of Five Nights at Freddy's, not only am I flattered to be your guide and ask that you please consider subscribing, but I'll also go ahead and quickly explain what's going on here. This purple man is franchise antagonist William Afton, and the 5 ghosts we see here are the spirits that go into the 5 animatronics present at Freddy Fazbear's during the night of the missing children incident. As you can probably tell, the animatronics being possessed by these spirits is the reason they walk around the pizzeria. Ralph the phone guy even explains to us in the very first game that the Freddy mascots are equipped with tech that allows them to roam around, with limitations.
So just be aware, the characters do tend to wander a bit. They're left in some kind of free roaming mode at night. Something about their servos locking up if they get turned off for too long.
Speaking of FNAF 1, the pizzeria you explore in these end-of-night minigames is identical to the layout of the cameras in that first game, so at least we know one thing about them. However, as you play these minigames, which I'll refer to as the FollowMe Minigames, it becomes very clear that this particular Freddy Fazbear's has been closed for a while. Not only is the place in a general state of decay, with water dripping from the ceilings as the sound of rain and thunder plays outside, but there's also cute little pixel mice walking around the building, with garbage strewn around and clear signs of abandonment. So not only do we know that this is the FNAF 1 location, but we also know that it's been abandoned by the point of these minigames, which isn't the case during the original FNAF 1. While the movie and the cobwebs strewn around the office in the very first game might make it seem like the FNAF 1 pizzeria is abandoned, the Week Before interactive novel is very clearly telling us that the pizzeria is open for business and is bringing in customers while the gameplay of FNAF 1 is happening. Not only do several endings involve the player character Ralph messing up events at an open Freddy's, but there are several mentions of Freddy Fazbear's grand reopening throughout the book. And this is where my first actual theory on these minigames comes into play, because I think these minigames have to take place after the main gameplay of Five Nights at Freddy's. It seems obvious at first, right? After all, if there's an abandoned building that looks just like the FNAF 1 location and the animatronics in these minigames are identical to the ones from the original Five Nights at Freddy's, then the answer is pretty simple, right? Nah, not really. Because, as stupid as this may sound, there's exactly 8 pixels that mess with this entire theory. The 2 buttons we can see on 16-bit Freddy's chest. Let me explain what I mean. In Five Nights at Freddy's, we can pretty clearly see that Freddy Fazbear, the leader of the Fazbear Band, doesn't have any buttons on his chest whatsoever. In Five Nights at Freddy's 2, which takes place in 1987 and before FNAF 1, Freddy's withered variant does have 2 buttons on his chest, unlike his fixed version. So, if the withered animatronics were changed between FNAF 2 and 1, and one of these changes was Freddy's buttons being removed, that means the FollowMe Minigames have to happen between Five Nights at Freddy's and Five Nights 2, right? Well, not necessarily. Scott, why do you do this to me? You see, as the minigames go on, it becomes very clear that the purple guy, William Afton, is attacking and dismantling the animatronics for a very specific reason: to take their endoskeletons. This is even explained by Phone Dude while we work at Fazbear's Fright, the horror attraction. The props we see in the building are just plush mascot suits, and none of the supporting skeletons for the animatronics are present at the location. And these endos, something that the animatronics need to be able to move, are absent when we look at the disassembled suits near the safe room where Afton gets springlocked. I get into the reasons why Afton steals the endos in the video on screen right now, but long story short, he needs these endos to fully understand the power of possession and why the souls of the kids he killed ended up in the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza mascots. Unfortunately, for any hypothetical future Freddy's locations, the animatronics kinda need that infrastructure to, move. And we know thanks to sister location in the FNAF novels that it's the metal endoskeletons that allowed the victims of the missing children incident to possess the animatronics. And it goes without saying that if Fazbear Entertainment replaced the endos, the animatronics we see in FNAF 1 wouldn't be possessed. But they very clearly are. Also, why would the FNAF 1 building be abandoned and already set up for Freddy-themed birthday parties before it even opened? After all, we got confirmation from the Into the Pit game last year that the original Freddy's looks nothing like the one from the original FNAF. So, what do the buttons mean? Well, the early era FNAF games had a lot of design inconsistencies, and it's possible that Scott just modeled the sprite off of Withered Freddy and not Freddy Fazbear like he should have. All the other clues point to this building being abandoned after FNAF 1, and William coming there at some point in the 90s, so let's roll with that presumption. This is where the simple part of the video ends, by the way. The year that FNAF 1 takes place was a huge subject of debate in the last few months because of the new The Week Before interactive novel, but the options essentially boil down to 3 dates: 1989, 1992, and 1998. I've talked about the evidence for all 3 of these many times before, and there's tons of people who feel more strongly about these dates than I do, but I personally believe in FNAF 1 taking place in 1992. Candy Bunny, a fellow theorist, has a 53-minute long video going over all of the evidence for FNAF 1's timeline placement, so hey, if you've got 3,180 something seconds to spare, it's a great watch to get your personal thoughts in order. Personally, like I said, I think FNAF 1 happens in the year 1992, so I'm going to roll with this theory from now on. However, if you disagree, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments as I read each and every single one, and I always try to take what you say down below into consideration in my future theories. So, we know that these minigames happen after FNAF 2 and FNAF 1, so in my opinion they have to happen at some point after 1992. However, it's also very clear that the building has been closed long enough for it to be on the verge of collapse, and that it's got itself a bit of a mouse problem, so I think it's fair to say it happens at least 2 or so years after FNAF 1. Now, can we use any evidence from the rest of the franchise to explain where in the timeline these minigames take place? Yes. Yes, we can. Like I said earlier, it's likely that these minigames are showing us William Afton taking the FNAF 1 band's endoskeletons to experiment on in his underground bunker, which just so happens to be the same one from sister location. This is why the fun times are so desperate to be free, and why their signature phrase is, "You don't know what we've been through." So now we can be fairly certain that the FollowMe minigames happen after FNAF 1, but before sister location and FNAF 3. This is backed up by William Afton's complete absence from sister location and the fact that he appears in the final cutscene of that game as Springtrap. So whenever it was that William got springlocked had to be before those games. Well, had to is a bit strong, but to be honest, I think it's a fair assumption. Already, we're making progress. Since FNAF 3 happens either in 2015 or 30 years after FNAF 1, which would be 2022, we've got a time gap of...
What?
No, alright. I know that sounds bad.
Yeah, maybe we didn't make that much progress. There's still a huge time gap here. Okay, clearly we're gonna need a bit more than pure indisputable facts for this one. I get that, but what can we use? Well, for that we're gonna need to talk about the timeline placement of sister location, because that's totally not the most obscurely placed game in the timeline. Huge thank you for that one, Scott. Five Nights at Freddy's 6th mainline installment, Sister Location, is probably the hardest to place in the timeline out of all the games this franchise has had thus far. Not only is the sci-fi vibe of my favorite visual novel a huge departure from anything FNAF had done before, but the game is also very vague about its timeline placement. The only thing we know about it is that Michael Afton goes down to the Circus Babies Entertainment and Rentals facility by his father William's orders, and that on his 5th day, he dies to the stupid keypad puzzle 56 times before getting scooped by Circus Baby and her traveling circus of robo-furries. The fun times wear him as a suit for a while, before descending into the sewers and leaving his rotting body in the middle of the street. After this, Mike vows to find his father William, who is implied to be dead at this point, and the game ends. Using the environment of the game, it seems that it shouldn't take place too late into the timeline, maybe even right after FNAF 1. After all, Mike uses a stereotypical box TV to watch his favorite soap opera, and it looks like modern communications technology hasn't been invented yet, at least by the look of the stuff used in the bunker. For these and other reasons, I'm confident in placing Sister Location in the 1990s, right after FNAF 1 and the FollowMe Minigames. Or am I? You see, it's always struck me as odd that it took Mike several decades to find his father after the events of Sister Location. What did he do during this time, and why didn't he think of checking the old Freddy Fazbear buildings to look for his father? Unless he didn't have time to do that. Hear me out. What if the FollowMe Minigames and FNAF sister location take place way later into the timeline, and William was actually only in the safe room for a few years? Scientifically speaking, after about 7 years of rotting in that damp safe room, not only would William be covered in mold, but he'd also be a pile of bones and spare ligaments, and FNAF 3 makes it pretty clear that he's still very much in the flesh. So, if the FollowMe Minigames happen in the early 2000s or even 2010s, and Mike is either trapped in William's nightmare experiments or helping him discover Remnant, the timeline fits much cleaner. Trust me. Need proof? Well, I'm glad you asked. I present to you the updated FollowMe Timeline. Years after Freddy Fazbear was shut down, William was forced to go back to the last location to extract the volatile spiritual energy of his most important victims from their animatronic shells so he could experiment on them with the help of Mike, who had been reluctantly helping him for years at this point. One day, the remnant of his victims started getting volatile and dangerous, and William had to go back to the original location to get the iconic spring bodysuit that he killed them in order to bring them back under his control. However, somehow the ghost of the missing children returned, and chased Afton into his own suit, resulting in his death. Michael, frankly not too bothered by the fact that his deadbeat serial killer dad had just disappeared, found a recording from his dad tasking him to go back into the bunker to put his sister Elizabeth back together, as Afton had been experimenting on her remnant and that of others for at least a decade at this point. He did as he was told and almost died several times in the process, but eventually he was rewarded for his bravery by being skinned by his sister and worn alive for weeks on end before being kept alive with mysterious soul metal magic. Anyway, after that average Tuesday in the FNAF universe was over, Michael decided to find his dad and give him a piece of his mind. Unfortunately, weeks or even years went by without anything. That is, until one fine evening in the middle of 2022. Actually, this evening was obviously far from fine because 2022 sucked, but since Michael was basically dead at this point, the virus was the least of his worries. The higher-ups at Fazbear's Fright thrilled at the sight of a potential new hire who looked like the human equivalent of an aubergine left in the sun for several centuries, instantly accepted his job application. And this was where Michael finally found his father. I think this later placement of the FollowMe Minigames works well, because not only does it explain the huge gap between FNAF 1 and FNAF 3 that most timelines have, but it also gives William more time to experiment with Remnant and truly make the fun times suffer, explaining their motivations in sister location. It also explains why Springtrap's body isn't a fully mummified skeleton, but appears as a skinless red corpse instead. Personally, if FollowMe happening in the 2000s is true, I'd probably place it around 2010, as it gives space for other theories such as Vanessa from Security Breach being the secret fourth Afton child, and William trapping his son Michael in the nightmare experiments for years. It also helps justify the decayed state of the FNAF 1 building in the minigames, as well as how it took so long for anyone to find William since no one thought to look in the long-abandoned pizzeria. I'm not 100% sure about this, as there is also evidence for William's Springlock failure happening right after FNAF 1, as shown to us in the novel trilogy in the FNAF movie, but FollowMe happening in the 2000s is definitely something worth thinking about, with some interesting timeline implications if it's true. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed its theory and the different style and direction I took it in. I'm still not fully sure about my new interpretation of the FollowMe Minigames, but if you have any questions about this theory, please comment and remember to like and subscribe as it helps out a lot, and I'm trying to hit 10k subscribers before the end of the year. That'll be all from me.